The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the cold sky. Mist clung to the cliffs, twisting like pale ghosts over the rocky peaks. In a small, silent valley, a house stood alone, its stones worn, its walls heavy with shadow. Inside, Celine sat in a quiet room, her hands folded over her knees. Her eyes, dark and deep, reflected more than sorrow. They held the steady glow of someone who had once been a noblewoman, and now felt the weight of being cast aside. She had been called Barren, a woman who could not bear children, a woman whose family had declared her useless. Her name had been whispered in halls where she once walked with pride, now spat out as though it carried disease. Celine had hoped for compassion or at least silence, but there had been none, only the sharp, cold words of her father and the bitter disappointment of her mother. "Take her away," her father had said. "She brings shame. She has no purpose here." The servants had avoided looking at her as they bound her hands with coarse rope. Even the wind seemed to mourn her fate, whistling mournfully through the cracks of the walls. She was led out into the gray morning, the smell of frost and earth filling her lungs, and the sound of her family's footsteps fading behind her. Celine was being sold, not for who she was, not for her mind, not for her heart, but for a single word: Barren. They sold her to the mountains, to the harsh wilderness beyond the valley, where the Alpha King ruled a pack feared by all. No one had seen him and lived to describe him. His name, Kyle, was spoken only in awe and terror, a sound like steel cutting through silence. The journey to the pack's land was long. Celine walked beside the men who escorted her, her head bowed, her thoughts a storm of fear and disbelief. Each step brought her closer to a life she had never imagined, a life ruled by wolves and by a king who was said to be merciless. At night she slept under the open sky. Stars pricked the darkness like frozen fire, and the wind carried strange noises, howls that were neither entirely human nor entirely beast. Celine shivered. The world she had known, the life of silk and velvet and polished halls, was gone. What remained was cold stone, shadowed forests, and the promise of an unknown power that waited beyond the peaks. By the time they reached the pack's territory, the air had grown heavier. Pine trees towered like silent sentinels, their branches bending under the weight of snow. The mountains opened into a wide plateau, and there, in the heart of the wilderness, Celine saw it, the stronghold of the Alpha King. It was carved into the rock, dark and grand, with high towers that caught the light of the pale sun. Smoke curled from its chimneys, carrying the scent of fire and iron. Celine's heart pounded in her chest. The guards led her through massive gates, and she could hear whispers behind her, the low murmurs of the pack. They stared at her, sizing her up. To them she was a stranger, a fragile shadow in their world of strength. She could feel their eyes as she walked, some curious, some doubtful, others openly hostile. Inside, the keep was cold and echoing. The stone floors rang with each step, and the walls were decorated with symbols that spoke of power, of battles won and lost, of an ancient lineage that commanded respect and fear. Celine was brought before a council of elders who did not speak her name. They asked questions about her health, her family, her usefulness. She answered them with quiet words, careful and measured, hiding the storm that raged in her chest. But it was not the elders who decided her fate. The Alpha King would, and no one saw him except when he chose to appear. Celine waited in the cold hall, the shadows stretching across the walls like long, dark fingers. Time moved slowly. She counted the seconds, the minutes, each one heavier than the last. Her mind wandered to what she had left behind, her home, her family, the life she had known. And yet beneath the sorrow a quiet defiance burned. She had been called worthless, but she would not vanish without leaving a trace of herself. Then, the great doors opened. The sound of hinges echoed like thunder. A figure entered, tall and commanding, with eyes that seemed to pierce the very air. His presence silenced the room. Guards straightened, elders bowed their heads, and even the wind outside seemed to pause. Kyle, the Alpha King, walked toward her, each step measured, each movement deliberate. Celine's heart raced. She had heard the stories of his power, his cunning, his merciless justice. Yet as he stopped before her, she saw not just a king, but a man who carried the weight of his world in his gaze. His eyes were dark, deep as midnight, yet there was something in them that made her feel as if he could see through every lie, every fear, every secret of her heart. "You are Celine," he said, his voice low and steady like the growl of a wolf beneath a mountain. They say you have nothing to offer. Celine lifted her chin. I have my mind. I have my courage. I do not have children, but I do not lack strength. Cale's eyes studied her. He said nothing at first, only circled her slowly, as if testing the very air around her. The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls pressing in with tension. Finally, he stopped and nodded once, almost imperceptibly. You will remain, he said, but not as a servant. You will learn the ways of this pack, and you will prove whether your spirit can match your words. Fail, and the mountains will consume you. Celine felt a chill, but it was not from the cold. It was the weight of destiny, heavy on her shoulders. She nodded, her heart steadying. Somehow she knew this was the beginning of a new life, one where the world would test her, shape her, and demand everything she had. As she was led to her quarters, she caught glimpses of the pack moving like shadows, figures as strong as wolves. Their eyes sharp, their movements precise. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with disdain. She would have to earn their respect and perhaps survive their jealousy. That night, as snow fell silently outside her small chamber, Celine sat by the window, staring at the dark mountains. The wind carried the howl of wolves in the distance, a sound both terrifying and strangely comforting. She could feel the pull of the land, the ancient power that hummed beneath the rocks and trees. It was a power that she did not yet understand, but she sensed that it had already chosen her. Sleep did not come easily. Celine thought of her past, of the life that had been taken from her. She thought of the Alpha King, whose gaze had left a mark she could not ignore. And she thought of the pack, a world ruled by strength, cunning, and shadow, where she would have to find her place or disappear entirely. Outside, the moon rose over the jagged peaks, silver light spilling across the snow. In its glow, Celine felt the first stirrings of something she had not known she possessed. Hope. Not for comfort, not for ease, but for power, for courage, for a chance to be more than what the world had decided she was. And far across the mountains, in the heart of the pack, Cale watched the moon as well. His mind lingered on the shadowed figure who had entered his domain. Celine, so fragile yet unbroken, something in her had awakened a spark within him, a curiosity that neither time nor distance could extinguish. The mountains were silent, but the air was thick with destiny. Two lives cast by fate into the same cold, jagged land had met. One would rise, one would fall, or perhaps together they would change the mountains forever. And so, in the heart of a world built on power, fear, and ancient laws, Celine's story began, not with a crown, not with a victory, but with the quiet defiance of a woman who refused to vanish. The howl of a wolf broke the stillness, sharp and lonely, echoing across the cliffs. Celine's heart leapt. She felt it in her chest, a whisper of challenge, a promise of danger, and a strange, irresistible pull. She did not yet know what lay ahead, but she knew this. The mountains would test her. The pack would test her, and the Alpha King, he would test her most of all, and she would meet that test. The morning light cut through the snow like pale silver blades. Celine rose from her small chamber, the cold biting her skin as she stepped onto the stone balcony of the keep. The mountains stretched endlessly before her, jagged and silent, yet alive with secrets. The howl of distant wolves echoed through the valleys, a sound that both frightened and intrigued her. Today, Kyle would see her again. The memory of his gaze from the night before lingered in her mind, a mixture of power, curiosity, and something she could not name. Celine tightened the cloak around her shoulders and took a deep breath. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with steady courage. The courtyard was alive with movement. Warriors of the pack trained with weapons, their movements precise and practiced. Others ran through the snow, their eyes sharp, their muscles coiled like springs. Celine felt her heart quicken. She had entered this world as a shadow, weak and unknown, but now she would begin to prove herself. A sharp voice cut through the morning air. Celine. She turned and saw Cale standing at the edge of the training ground, his presence commanding all attention. Even the snow seemed to bow before him. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and she felt the weight of his scrutiny. "You will train," he said, his voice calm, but edged with authority. "Not for the pack, not for me, but for yourself. Strength is not given. It is earned." Celine nodded, though fear coiled in her stomach. She had never trained with warriors. Her life had been of books, halls, and careful manners. Yet she had survived worse. She had survived being cast aside. Kyle gestured and a young warrior approached her. "This is Rylan," Kyle said. "He will guide you. Fail, and you will find the mountains are less forgiving than I am." Rylan, tall and muscular, studied her with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. "You've never fought before," he said bluntly. "This will be harder than you think." Celine lifted her chin. "Then I will learn." The training began slowly. Rylan taught her how to move like the wolves themselves, silent, precise, balanced. At first she stumbled. Her arms shook, her legs betrayed her, and every movement felt awkward and clumsy. The other warriors watched, some amused, others skeptical. Celine's face burned with shame, but she did not give up. Kale observed from the edge of the courtyard, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, but Celine could feel the weight of his gaze like a shadow on her back. Each time she faltered, he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. There was judgment there, yes, but also something else. Approval? Curiosity? Something that stirred an unfamiliar fire within her. Days passed in a blur of training and trials. Celine learned to move quietly through the snow, to aim with a bow, and to read the rhythm of the pack's movements. Each success was met with a nod from Kale, each failure with a measured silence that spoke louder than any words. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Kale approached her in the training ground. He did not speak at first. He only stood there silent as the wind whipped around them. "You are improving," he said finally. "Faster than I expected." Celine felt a flicker of pride. "I am trying," she said softly. Kale's eyes narrowed. "Trying is not enough. You must survive. You must adapt. You must understand the pack and its ways. Only then will you have power over your own fate." Celine nodded again, but her thoughts wandered. Power. Fate. She had been powerless her entire life. Sold, discarded, treated as though she were nothing. And yet now she felt the stirrings of something new. Strength. Courage. The beginnings of her own destiny. That night she could not sleep. The snow lay heavy on the mountains, the wind carrying whispers that sounded almost like voices. She wandered to the edge of the keep and looked out across the valley. Shadows moved in the distance, wolves or perhaps pack members on patrol. The world was vast, dangerous, and alive, and for the first time Celine felt it belonged to her as much as to anyone. Suddenly a shadow moved along the ridge above her. Her heart leapt. Kale had appeared without sound, as if the wind itself had carried him. His eyes glinted in the moonlight. "You do not rest," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You are awake when others sleep. You are learning quickly, but there is more to survive here than strength." Celine shivered, not from cold but from the intensity in his gaze. "What else must I learn?" she asked. "Patience, observation, understanding the shadows and the silence. The pack respects those who understand it, not just those who fight." He turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her with a sense of unease and fascination. Celine realized that Kale was not just testing her body. He was testing her mind, her spirit, her heart. And the thought both frightened and thrilled her. The next morning, Kale summoned her to a different trial, a hunt. Celine's hands trembled as she followed the warriors into the dense forest that bordered the pack's stronghold. The snow muffled their steps, the cold biting into her skin, but she pushed forward. "Follow silently," Kale instructed. "Do not speak. Do not draw attention. Watch, listen, and wait." Celine did as he commanded. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes set her heart racing. She moved carefully, mimicking the motions of the wolves she had seen in the distance. Her eyes scanned the forest, her senses alive to every sound and shadow. Hours passed. Her muscles ached, her breath came in sharp bursts, but she did not falter. And then, a sudden movement caught her eye. A small deer, unaware of the hunters closing in. Rylan signaled her and she drew her bow. Her hands shook, but she steadied them, recalling Kale's words. Patience, observation, understanding. The arrow flew, striking true. The deer fell, and Celine felt a surge of triumph, not just for the kill, but for the proof that she could survive, that she could belong in this harsh, unforgiving world. Kale emerged from the shadows, his eyes fixed on her. "You have potential," he said. "More than I thought. But the forest is full of lessons. One mistake and it could cost you more than pride." Celine bowed her head, silently acknowledging his words. Yet inside, a spark of something dangerous and beautiful had been lit, a spark that would not be extinguished. The days that followed were filled with more tests. Celine learned to read the pack signs, to move like the wolves, to anticipate danger before it struck. She grew stronger, more confident, yet always aware of Kale's presence, watching, judging, guiding. Their interactions were brief, almost silent, but charged with an intensity that neither could ignore. One evening, as Celine rested near the fire, she noticed Kale sitting across from her, the flames casting shadows across his face. He did not speak for a long time, only watched her. "You are not like the others," he said finally. "They are predictable, bound by fear. You are something else, something dangerous." Celine met his gaze, her voice steady. "I am not afraid." Kale's lips curved almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps you should be. Fear keeps the mind sharp, the body ready. But courage is rare. And you, Celine, have it in abundance." For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the two of them, the fire between them, the mountains around them, the cold wind that carried the howl of wolves. It was a moment of connection, fragile and fleeting but undeniable. Hook cliffhanger. That night, Celine dreamed of the mountains, of shadows moving, of a voice calling her name. When she woke, she found a strange symbol etched in the snow outside her window, a mark of the pack's ancient magic. Kyle had left it there, and Celine understood. The trials were only beginning, and her place in the pack and in Kale's life was far from certain. The mountains had grown colder, sharper as winter deepened. Snow draped over cliffs and pine branches like a thick white blanket. Celine walked through the forest, her boots crunching on frozen ground, the chill seeping through her cloak. Every breath formed a cloud of mist, and every sound seemed louder in the stillness. The pack's territory stretched endlessly before her, dark and alive, full of whispers that spoke of old power and long-forgotten secrets. She had trained for weeks now, learning the ways of the pack. Her body had grown stronger, her mind sharper, but she knew that survival required more than strength. It required understanding the shadows, listening to the whispers of the land and seeing truths hidden behind faces and customs. The pack was not just warriors. It was a web of history, loyalty, and superstition, and Celine felt herself only beginning to understand it. Kale had begun to involve her in the pack's secrets. He watched her closely, testing not just her skill but her spirit. Sometimes he appeared silently at the edge of the trees, his dark eyes observing her every move. He rarely spoke, yet when he did, his words carried weight that echoed long after he left. "You move well," he said one morning, his voice low and steady. "But skill alone is not enough. You must see beyond what is in front of you. The pack watches, the mountains watch, and the past watches as well." Celine nodded, unsure what he meant, but feeling the weight of his gaze. She had begun to suspect that Kale's interest in her was more than curiosity. There was a storm beneath his control, a history and a destiny that involved her in ways she could not yet comprehend. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the central hall. A messenger had arrived from her old home. Celine froze as she saw familiar faces. Her family, their expressions twisted with anger and greed. They had come to reclaim her, to drag her back into a world that had already rejected her once. Kale met her eyes and said nothing. Instead, he walked forward with measured steps, every movement commanding silence. The pack members gathered, their eyes sharp, ready for conflict. The cold wind carried tension like a blade, and Celine felt her heart race. "You will not return," Kale said to her family, his voice cutting through the air like steel. "She belongs to the pack now. She has proven her worth. Her place is here." Her father's face reddened with fury. "You have no right. She is our blood. You cannot keep her here." Kale's dark eyes glinted. "I have every right. And she has chosen her path." Celine's heart pounded. The weight of the moment was enormous. For the first time, she saw the truth in Kale's power, not just in his strength, but in the authority he commanded. She could feel the pack around her, silent and unwavering, ready to defend their alpha's decision. Her family left, muttering threats and promises, but their presence had shaken her. She realized that her past was not gone. It had followed her, attempting to pull her back into a life she no longer wanted. She turned to Kale, her eyes searching his face for guidance. "You have faced much," Kale said softly, almost as if he sensed her thoughts. "But this is only the beginning. The pack, the mountains, and even the spirits of this land will test you. Are you ready for what comes next?" Celine's lips pressed together. I will face it, she said firmly. I will not run. Kyle's expression softened slightly, though only for a moment. Good, he said. You must understand why I watch you so closely. There is a prophecy, old and whispered, that speaks of one who will change the pack's fate. That one may be you. Celine's heart skipped a beat. Prophecy? Change? She had never imagined that her arrival in the mountains had meaning beyond survival. And yet, as she looked into Cale's eyes, she understood that her path was entwined with his in ways she could not yet see. The days that followed brought new trials. Cale sent her into the forest alone, not as a servant or a shadow, but as a participant in the pack's ancient rituals. She had to track, hunt, and navigate through the mountains' hidden paths, all while remaining unseen by rival clans and dangerous beasts. Each challenge tested not only her body, but her courage, her patience, and her ability to trust herself. One evening, deep in the heart of the forest, she came across a hidden chamber carved into the side of a cliff. The entrance was small, almost invisible beneath a curtain of frozen ivy. Her curiosity drew her inside, and she found walls covered in ancient symbols, etched deep into the rock, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. As she stepped forward, a chill ran down her spine. She felt the presence of something powerful, something old, and then a low growl echoed from the shadows. Celine's breath caught, but she did not flee. The shadows shifted, forming a figure, a wolf, massive and black, its eyes glowing like embers. You should not be here, the creature said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Celine realized it was no ordinary wolf. It was the spirit of the mountains, tied to Cale and the pack's ancient power. I am not afraid, Celine said, her voice steady though her heart raced. I only seek to understand. The spirit studied her, tilting its head. Few have courage enough to enter willingly. Many fear, many flee. Yet the prophecy speaks of one who walks without fear, who will face the shadows and change the fate of the pack. Celine's eyes widened. The prophecy?
You mean me?
The spirit's eyes glowed brighter. Perhaps, but the path is not yours alone. The Alpha King will guide you, test you, and challenge you. Together you may alter what has been written for centuries, or fail, and bring ruin upon all. A sudden gust of wind howled through the chamber, sending frost across the walls. Celine shivered, yet she felt a strange clarity. The danger was real, the stakes high, but she had a place here, a purpose beyond what she had ever known. When she emerged from the chamber, the moon had risen over the mountains, painting the snow in silver light. She thought of Kyle, of the way he had observed her from afar, and of the prophecy that bound them together. The wind carried the distant howl of wolves, and she felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders. Kyle met her at the edge of the forest. His dark eyes reflected the moonlight, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken words and possibilities. You have seen something few ever witness, he said finally. The spirits do not reveal themselves lightly. What did you learn? Celine hesitated. That the pack, the mountains, they are older than any of us. And that I may have a role to play. Kyle nodded, his expression unreadable. Role, power, destiny. These are words, but their meaning is revealed only in action. You will face choices that will test your heart as well as your strength. Are you ready for that? Celine met his gaze without fear. I am. He studied her for a long moment, then turned toward the keep. Then come. The pack gathers tomorrow for the ceremony of shadows. It is a test of loyalty and courage. Only those who prove themselves may remain in the inner circle of the Alpha. You will be watched. Every action will be judged. Celine swallowed, feeling both fear and excitement. The ceremony of shadows would be unlike anything she had faced. It was a trial not just of skill, but of spirit, cunning, and the ability to navigate power and loyalty in a world where every misstep could be fatal. That night, Celine could not sleep. She lay in her chamber, staring at the frozen mountains beyond her window. The wind carried whispers that seemed almost alive, reminding her of the spirit she had met, of the prophecy that bound her fate to Cale's, and of the trials yet to come. She realized that survival was no longer her only goal. She wanted understanding, power, and a place in a world that had once cast her aside. And though she did not yet admit it even to herself, she wanted something else. Kyle, the Alpha King who had tested her, challenged her, and yet stirred a feeling in her she could neither name nor resist. hook, cliffhanger. As the first light of dawn broke across the snow-covered peaks, Celine heard a howl, deep, resonant, and full of warning. Kyle appeared at her window, his eyes darker than the morning shadows. "The ceremony begins," he said, "and the pack will watch closely. Tonight you will either prove yourself or vanish into the shadows forever." The mountains seemed to hold their breath, and Celine understood that her true test had only just begun. The night was darker than Celine had ever seen. The snow lay thick over the mountains, muffling every sound except the whispers of the wind. The pack's stronghold glowed faintly in the distance, lanterns flickering like tiny stars against the blackness. Celine's heart beat quickly, not only from the cold but from the anticipation that filled every nerve of her body. Tonight was the ceremony of shadows, a trial that would test her courage, her loyalty, and her place in the pack. Kale met her at the edge of the courtyard. His presence was commanding, yet there was a flicker of something softer in his gaze as he looked at her. "Remember," he said, "this is more than skill. It is spirit, patience, and wisdom. One wrong choice, and the pack will turn against you." Celine nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Her training had prepared her for strength, for stealth, for survival, but she knew this ceremony would demand more. She had to navigate the pack's unwritten rules, its hidden tests, and the eyes of warriors who would judge every movement, every decision, every glance. The ceremony began with a low, haunting howl that echoed through the mountains. The pack gathered in a wide circle, shadows moving like living smoke in the lantern light. Kale stood at the center, silent and imposing, his gaze sweeping over the assembly. Celine stepped forward, her breath forming clouds in the cold air, every nerve alive with tension. The first trial was one of observation. Warriors placed objects, symbols of the pack's history and power, across the clearing. Each symbol carried meaning: loyalty, courage, cunning. Celine had to identify the patterns, understanding which ones could guide her path and which were traps. She moved carefully, noting the subtle shifts in the warriors' stances, the placement of the symbols and the silent cues Kale had taught her. Each step was deliberate, each choice measured. The pack's eyes followed her, some curious, some doubtful, but she did not falter. Next came a trial of courage. A shadowed figure emerged from the darkness, moving like a wolf, yet larger, more dangerous and shrouded in an unnatural mist. The spirit of the mountains, like the one she had seen in the hidden chamber, tested her resolve. Celine's hands shook, her heart raced, but she remembered Kyle's words. Courage is rare, but it can shape destiny. She faced the shadow, standing tall even as it lunged toward her. She did not attack, did not flee. Instead, she held her ground, moving with precision and awareness. The shadow circled, testing her patience, seeking to provoke fear, but Celine remained steady. When it finally retreated, leaving her unscathed, a murmur ran through the pack. Even the warriors who had doubted her looked on with new respect. The final trial was one of loyalty. Kale stepped forward and spoke in his low, commanding voice. "The pack watches not only what you do, but whom you trust. One betrayal can destroy the chain of loyalty that binds us all." Celine's task was to retrieve a token from a rival group of warriors, testing whether she could act independently without losing sight of the pack's values. The rival warriors circled her, eyes sharp, ready to challenge her every move. She felt the pressure, the weight of the mountains, the pack, and the unseen prophecy pressing down on her. She moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate, reading the movements of those around her. Each decision had consequence, each step mattered. When she finally reached the token, she did not flee blindly. Instead, she returned through the shadows, navigating traps and obstacles with a careful, patient grace. The pack watched, and whispers of approval began to ripple through the circle. Kyle's eyes never left her. When she returned, he stepped forward, his presence towering and commanding. "You have done well," he said. "Better than many who were born in this pack. You have shown strength, courage, and loyalty. But strength alone does not define a leader or a mate." Celine felt a mixture of relief and tension. She had survived, yet she sensed the night was far from over. The pack moved to the final ceremony, the lighting of the circle of shadows. The ritual was ancient, its meaning clear to the Alpha, but veiled in mystery to outsiders. Celine had learned much, yet this was the ultimate test. Would she rise to meet destiny, or would she falter in the face of scrutiny and power? The fire at the center of the circle burned high, casting long, flickering shadows across the snow. The pack stood silent, waiting. Kale raised his hand and the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint whispers of the mountain spirits. The air seemed charged heavy with expectation. "You have proven yourself tonight," Cale said, his voice carrying across the circle. "But proof is not enough. You must make a choice." Celine's eyes widened. "Choice?" Cale nodded. "The pack has rules ancient and unyielding. To join fully, you must pledge yourself. To the pack, to the mountains, and to me as the Alpha King. Only then will the prophecy be complete. But it is not a choice made lightly. Once spoken, it binds you forever." Celine felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. She thought of her past, her family, her betrayal, the life she had lost. And she thought of the present, her strength, her courage, the pack that had begun to accept her, and Cale, whose presence had become impossible to ignore. The silence stretched, thick and tense. The pack waited. The mountains watched. And Celine knew that her answer would define her fate, her destiny, and the future of the pack itself. Finally she spoke, her voice steady despite the storm of fear in her chest. "I pledge myself to the pack, to the mountains, and to you, Cale." A ripple of surprise moved through the warriors. Some whispered, some nodded, some stared in disbelief. Cale's dark eyes met hers, and for the first time a flicker of emotion softened his features. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You have chosen wisely," he said. "But beware, this is not the end. Trials will come, as they always do. Loyalty, courage, and strength must be proven every day. And your place? Your place beside me will be tested as well." Celine felt a mixture of relief and tension. She had survived the ceremony, she had proven herself, and she had made her choice. And yet the mountains whispered warnings. The pack's eyes lingered with suspicion, and Cale's presence remained a storm she could neither predict nor resist. As the ceremony ended, Celine was led back to her quarters. Her body ached from the trials, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. She had faced fear, shadow, and judgment, and had emerged stronger. She understood now that her place in the pack was not a gift. It was earned, and she had earned it. But the night was far from over. As she settled near the fire, Kyle appeared once more, standing silently at the doorway. His gaze was intense, unreadable, and charged with an unspoken tension. "You have done well," he said, his voice low and steady. "But the mountains do not rest, and neither do the spirits. There are forces beyond the pack, beyond even my control, that will challenge you. And soon." Selena met his gaze, her heart pounding. "I am ready," she said, though inside she felt the flutter of doubt and fear. Cale stepped closer, the flickering fire casting shadows across his face. "Ready, yes, but be warned, Celine. Courage and strength are not always enough. The heart can betray, and even loyalty can be tested. Your path is not yours alone. Remember that." The wind howled outside, carrying a distant cry that sounded like a warning, or perhaps a promise. Celine understood that the mountains were alive, that the pack was more than warriors, and that her destiny was bound tightly to the Alpha King and the prophecy she barely understood. Hook. Cliffhanger. Just as Celine was about to rest, a shadow moved at the edge of the keep. A rival pack, unknown and dangerous, had approached under the cover of darkness. Their eyes glowed in the snow, and their intent was clear. Cale's gaze met hers, sharp and commanding. "The mountains call for blood," he said, "and tonight, you will see what it truly means to survive." The night stretched on, alive with tension and danger, and Selene understood that her greatest trial was yet to come. The night air was electric, sharp with tension and the scent of snow and pine. The rival pack had approached under the cover of darkness, their eyes glowing in the shadows like embers ready to ignite. The mountains seemed to hold their breath, silent witnesses to the storm about to break. Celine stood beside Cale in the courtyard, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Cale's presence was commanding, even more so in the tense quiet before battle. His dark eyes swept across the snow, every muscle coiled, every movement precise. Celine had never seen him like this. An alpha in full command of his pack, fierce and unyielding. And yet, as his gaze landed on her, there was something else, recognition, trust, and a hint of something unspoken that sent warmth through her chest. "They come for blood," Cale said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "But we are the mountains. We are the pack. We do not flee and we do not falter." Selene nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. She had trained, She had survived trials and she had proven herself in the ceremony of shadows, but this was different. This was real. Lives would be at stake. Her heart raced, but she refused to let fear rule her. The rival pack stepped into the clearing, their presence dark and threatening. They moved like shadows, silent and coordinated, their intent clear: challenge the alpha and take what they believed was theirs. Celine could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Kyle raised his hand, signaling his pack to form a defensive circle. Warriors stepped forward, their movements fluid, ready, each one a living extension of the pack's strength. Celine's place was at the front beside Kale, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. "You have trained for this," Kyle whispered to her, just enough for her to hear. "Remember your lessons. Trust yourself, trust the pack, and trust me." Celine swallowed and nodded. The rival pack lunged, a blur of movement and aggression. Snow flew into the air as warriors clashed, the sounds of struggle echoing through the mountains. Celine moved with the precision she had learned, anticipating attacks, using her surroundings, and staying close to Kale when danger was near. Every action was deliberate, every choice measured. Hours seemed to pass in moments. The rival pack was relentless, but the defenders were stronger, wiser, and bound by loyalty. Celine found herself growing into the strength Kale had seen in her from the beginning. She no longer feared the shadows. She understood them. She moved with them, almost as if she and the mountains themselves were one. At the height of the battle, a figure from the rival pack broke through the front lines, charging directly at Kale. Celine's heart froze. Without thinking, she leapt forward, placing herself between the attacker and Kale. The warrior faltered, surprised by her courage, and Kale's hand was on the rival's shoulder in an instant, twisting him away with strength and control. "You are reckless," Kyle said, his voice sharp but calm, his eyes locking on hers. "But you are brave, that is something rare." Celine's chest heaved, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "I will not let anyone harm you," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Kale's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. He did not answer with words, but the way his eyes lingered on her told her more than speech ever could. The battle raged until the rival pack, seeing their strength falter against the unity and skill of Kale's warriors, began to retreat. Celine felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion, her body aching from the fight but her spirit soaring. The pack had survived, and she had proven herself not only in trials but in the crucible of real danger. When the last of the intruders vanished into the shadows, silence fell over the mountains. The pack gathered around Kale and Celine, their eyes filled with respect, admiration, and the unspoken understanding that something had changed tonight. Celine was no longer a newcomer. She was part of the pack in every way that mattered. Kale stepped forward, his cloak sweeping the snow as he approached Celine. The warriors parted, giving space as the alpha stood before her. He looked at her with intensity, his dark eyes unreadable yet full of meaning. "You have faced fear, shadow, and trial," Kale said, his voice calm but powerful. "You have chosen loyalty when many would have faltered. You have stood beside me when others might have run. And now—" He knelt in the snow, the movement deliberate and commanding, yet with a gravity that made Celine's breath catch. "I choose you," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, loud enough for every warrior to hear. "Not because the prophecy demands it, not because the pack requires it, but because I see in you strength, courage, and heart. You will stand beside me, not as a shadow, but as my equal, my partner, my mate." A hush fell over the pack. Even the mountains seemed to pause, listening. Celine's heart raced, her chest tight with emotion she could hardly name. She had been cast aside, sold, treated as though she were nothing, and yet now here in the snow and shadows of the mountains she was chosen, by the Alpha King in front of the entire pack. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held her head high. I accept," she said, her voice steady, though the weight of the moment pressed upon her. "I pledge myself to you, Kale, as your equal, not as a shadow, but as part of this pack." Kyle extended his hand, and she took it. When their hands met, a spark seemed to pass between them, electric, silent, powerful. The pack erupted in howls, voices rising in approval and celebration. The mountains themselves seemed to echo the sound, rolling the victory through the valleys and peaks. That night, the fires burned high in the courtyard, the pack celebrating not just survival, but unity. Celine stood beside Kale, feeling the warmth of the fire and the weight of belonging. For the first time in her life, she was not discarded, not rejected. She was chosen, valued, and powerful in ways she had never imagined. Cale placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, his dark eyes softening as he spoke. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The mountains will continue to test us, the pack will face challenges, and our enemies are never far. But tonight we stand together. You have earned your place, Celine. And more than that, you have earned my respect, my trust, and my choice." Celine felt a warmth she could not name. A mix of pride, joy, and something deeper. Connection, recognition, love perhaps, though she did not speak the word aloud. She only nodded, standing tall beside the Alpha King who had chosen her, who had tested her, and who had now placed her at the center of this world of snow, wolves, and destiny. The night stretched on, filled with laughter, howls, and celebration. Yet even in the revelry, Celine knew the mountains held more secrets, more challenges, and more tests for the future. But for now, she allowed herself to feel peace, to feel power, belonging, and a bond that could not be broken. As the fires dwindled and the pack settled into the quiet of the night, Celine stood with Cale on the balcony overlooking the snow-covered peaks. The wind whispered through the mountains, carrying with it the echoes of spirits of past warriors and of prophecies yet to be fulfilled. Cale's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried across the snow to her ears. "You have survived the shadows, Celine. You have faced trials and chosen loyalty. The pack, the mountains, and we are bound to you now. And I to you." Celine turned to him, her heart full. "I am ready," she said softly, "for whatever comes next." Kyle's eyes held hers for a long moment, dark and unreadable, yet full of promise. "Then we walk forward together," he said. "The mountains, the pack, and destiny itself will follow us, and you will never be forgotten again." The snow fell gently around them, the mountains silent witnesses to the bond forged in courage, trial, and choice. Celine understood that her journey was far from over, but for the first time she was not alone. She had found her place, her strength, and her destiny beside the Alpha King, the one who had chosen her when the world had cast her aside. And in that moment, beneath the stars and the snow, Celine knew that she had truly arrived, powerful, unbroken, and fully alive.